So the yang energy is the doing, the busy, the active, the frenzied, the productive, the focused. Whereas the yin is going to be the more restful, the peaceful, the restoring, the rejuvenating, the inward, the slow, the quiet.
Welcome to the Sustainable Living Podcast. Tips, tools, and tactics for living a heart-centered life that honors Mother Earth and her inhabitants. The information shared on the Sustainable Living Podcast reflects the opinions of host Marian West, Janice Friant, and their guests. Please use your own discretion in research before applying any information to your individual situation. Now, here are your hosts, Marian and Janice.
Hello, everyone. This is Marianne, your host for today. So this episode is brought to you by our Patreon supporter, Karen Johnston. Woohoo, Karen! Thank you so much. So Karen is supporting us every month on Patreon. We are just so thankful and want to give her a shout out. Patreon is really helping us to bring the show to you. So if you have it in your heart to support us, please do. So let me tell you about Karen. I met Karen in a chicken class and she is an expert. She took the class, but man, she was like my teacher. So Karen has two businesses. One of them is called Peak Poultry, and she is raising heritage chickens. She is participating in a breeding program to keep those breeds alive. She knows so much. And if you are in North Carolina or around there, check her out. The business is called Peak Poultry, and you can find it on Facebook. There's a website. You get the best quality. If you think you want chickens in your life or if you want to add to your flock, definitely check out what Karen has to offer. Now she has another business, which I think that's really the bread and butter business. I think the chickens is like something she really, really loves to do. But you have to ask her about it if I'm right on that. So the other one is a dog kennel. So if you have a pooch who needs a home for a day or two or a weekend or when you go on vacation, it's called greenlevelkennel.com. And it is in Apex, North Carolina. So if you're around there, do support the ones which are supporting us. We so much appreciate it. Now on to today's guest. I asked Brodie Welch to come on our show because I thought her theme, her expertise fits well with our current, I think it's kind of a current theme we are having of inner sustainability and health, and how health is so important if we want to live a sustainable life. If we don't have that, it's very hard to do all the maybe extra things which require energy to, whatever it is, hanging the laundry instead of just plopping them in the dryer and be done with it. We can do that when we feel good, when we feel healthy, when we have energy. I usually research my guests pretty well, so I started to listen to a lot of Brodie's podcasts. And as I was listening, I grew more and more excited and honored to have her on our show. By now, you probably know that when I get excited about some, I want to share it with people and especially with you because we really try to bring value to you. That said, I was so excited finding out that Brodie is actually teaching online classes, so her knowledge is not just available for locals in her area. I asked her if she would be willing to give a discount to you if you were interested in taking some of her classes. She said yes and agreed to give a 15% discount for two of her offerings. And you will hear more of that at the end of the show. I don't want to take much more time. And by the way, there's a lot of free tools you can get on her website as well. So without further ado, let's get into our interview. Hopefully you get as excited as I am about what Brodie is doing and checking her out. Here we go. I'm here with a very, very special woman. So actually, she is teaching people to take care of themselves. And that's saying it very, very general. So today's guest, one of the things she does, she's giving people a free breath meditation. And I just did that to get ready for this interview. But she also teaches Chinese medicine, Ayurveda, and probably a lot more I don't even know about. So welcome, Brodie Welch, to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
I'm so glad you're here. So I talked about your free meditation and that you're teaching other things too. So I looked at your website. I know you're deep in Chinese medicine. And are you aware? What else do you do?
Well, Chinese medicine is a complete system of healthcare that actually encompasses acupuncture, Chinese herbs, lifestyle and diet counseling, as well as exercise, which would be things like qigong, breathing and moving together. And so just and body work, those are the branches of Chinese medicine that basically allows I help people apply Chinese medicine to their daily lives. And so really it's everything.
Cool.
I help people make sense of everything in their lives as either something that is medicinal, neutral, or taking them in the wrong direction. And so we work on just kind of seeing ourselves holistically. It's a mind, body, and spirit medicine with all these different branches. And so it really gets into practically every dimension of life. And in addition to my Chinese medical practice, which I've been doing for about 14 years, I also have teaching certifications in yoga and in healing qigong. I help people with meditation. I have extensive training in nutrition and different strategies towards weight optimization, and as well as helping people connect with their bodies, not just their physical bodies, but their breath bodies, their energy bodies, as well as up-leveling their relationships and habits. Because in order to really be different in the world, we have to know some about behavior change in order to make new habits stick. And so basically I try to give people, bring together as many of the tools that I've been able to gather in my past 20 years or so of being in the healing arts, so that they can apply them to themselves. Oh, essential oils is another thing that another way of doing that. I love teaching people how to use points on their own bodies to access through acupressure and to anoint with an essential oil to be able to mix that herbology piece with the body wisdom piece that's built into the system from an acupuncture perspective. So there's just like the tools are infinite, but really the philosophy and helping people understand themselves in a new way from the Ayurvedic and Chinese medicine perspectives, but also to bridge the gap between what they know they should be doing for themselves and actually doing it.
Wow, fantastic. In a sense, when I said Chinese medicine, I kind of covered everything, since you're saying it is everything. But I'm so glad you expanded. And what I'm hearing is that your purpose is you are not taking care of people, but you're teaching people to take care of themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely still have a clinical practice where people come in and I do acupuncture on them, and they feel better. They walk out, they don't necessarily have to do much except to tell me what's going on. But really the kind of a lot of the conditions that people come in for, whether it's chronic pain, whether it's a digestive issue, or an insomnia issue, a stress like anxiety, depression, mood related thing, whether it's fertility, whether it's menopause, it kind of doesn't matter, because the medicine is so often the same. It's like it ends up being the same things that I'm saying over and over again. And so really realizing that the true physician in the sort of general sense of the world is someone that teaches people how to take care of themselves, right? The original in Greek, the root for doctor was originally teacher, right? Like instructor. That this is someone who shows you how to do it on your own. So yes, empowering people with the tools that they need to do it on their own is much more sustainable, right? I'd much rather teach people to fish, so to speak, than have them being reliant on even natural medicines as opposed to chemical medicines. It's still not necessarily getting to the root of the problem, and what someone's going to do every day is going to be much more powerful than what's going to happen to them in an office visit.
Yeah, I love it. So it sounds like you're using the acupuncture and so other tools to help to relieve symptoms, so like an immediate pain or whatever it is, but then you search or you help your patients or people which are working with you to find out what is causing that symptom and then addressing that.
Absolutely. Yep. And we address that a lot of times as much as possible, seeing how our thoughts, our beliefs, our habits, our diet, all of the input is going either contributing to the imbalance or to the health of the person.
I think our thoughts are very similar in terms of how we approach sustainable living. And actually, that's why I was so happy you agreed to come onto the show, because I feel part of being sustainable is also being sustainable in our body and in our mind.
Absolutely. And we're talking about making a difference in the world and activism and people who are involved in helping the world in a bigger way. It's really easy to do that at the expense of one's own personal energy and burning out, and actually able to help no one in the long run. And so recognizing that self-care, just like brushing your teeth, is sort of a basic self-care habit that most of us already have. But there's so much more that constitutes kind of the core competencies of self-care that allow us to just have our bodies work for us in a reliable and sustainable way, to have like a mindfulness practice, to have a body movement, to have the right foods on board that we can digest, and to just have it be easy so that we can focus on all these other things that we might be called to do that are kind of our bigger calling in the world.
I see that so often, that people get so passionate about a cause and completely forget about themselves. And not just a cause. I think, well, both of us are women, and I mean, this might be sexist, I don't know, but I feel women tend to forget about themselves more than men do often.
I'm going to go with it may be sexist, but it's the culture that's sexist, in the sense that women are having to work harder to earn the same amount of money as men in most cultures. And the fact that women often come home to the second shift of more responsibilities around the house, whether or not they have children. If they're living with other people, it definitely, like, women are socialized to be the caretakers. And so most of the time it is the women who are a bit more conditioned to be more self-sacrificing and to not recognize or to feel like self-care is selfish, whereas in a way, men are given a bit more freedom in that regard to simply do what they need to do.
Would you elaborate on self-care being not selfish?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just you can't pour from an empty cup, right? On the days that I decide that I don't really need to meditate, or I don't really need to take a walk, or I'm not going to eat breakfast because somebody else needs me, it's like inevitably I'm not able to show up with the kind of presence and care and attention that I would if I had taken that time that I need for myself. And it's not really a lot of time, like we're talking we're talking a half an hour, maybe we're talking an hour. On the days when I know that I've done all of my practices, I'm able to serve with much more power, with much more presence, with much more caring, and with integrity, because I'm in integrity with myself.
Yeah. Now, you do so many things and you find time for self-care in your life. A lot of people say, I just don't have any time. How would you address it?
It's always an interesting thing. It's the same thing when someone says, I don't have the money. Like, we tend to have the money for the things that are really important, right? Just like we all have the same amount of time in a day, but we have different priorities. And so a lot of times, like, first of all, we've got this culture that where the busier we are and the kind of the more frenzied we're living, the more bragging rights we get, right? That if we're constantly, I'm doing all this, I'm so busy, I'm so exhausted. It's like we tend to kind of wound share over that. Like, oh yeah, me too. Oh my God, I was up so late last night. It's this idea that if we think about it from a Chinese medicine standpoint, we think about yin and yang, these two halves of the universe. So the yang energy is the doing, the busy, the active, the frenzied, the productive, the focused. Whereas the yin is going to be the more restful, the peaceful, the restoring, the rejuvenating, the inward, the slow, the quiet. We're in this culture that totally values yang, but doesn't see that yin is absolutely essential in order to do yang well, right? Like, we all know that it's really hard to have a busy, productive day when you've gotten terrible sleep the night before. it's easy to see that, like, oh, right, if I had gotten better sleep, I would be much more focused. I'd be much more on. My productive time would indeed be more focused and productive. So really seeing self-care as like, you've got to take the radical step of valuing it enough to do it, but then it becomes this solid foundation from which you can strongly stand on that platform and do your work in the world with far more clarity and efficiency and efficacy. And so really it just requires changing your priorities and recognizing that, like, if you're trying to chop down a tree with a really dull saw, that it could take you all day, but if you just stopped and sharpened the saw, it would go a lot quicker. And so that idea that taking the time in the morning that you need to do a morning routine, I'm a big fan of doing the important things early, because inevitably things are going to happen that we don't expect, and it's going to take us off track from our good intentions. And so if all this stuff is as automatic as waking up, getting out of bed, and brushing your teeth, if we can just habit stack a bunch more behaviors onto that at least gets us in touch with our bodies, in touch with our deepest priorities, in touch with our intuition, and gets us digesting well, then the whole rest of the day is going to go a lot better. Yes, we all have our challenges. We all have busy lives. We all have, like, very few of us are in a position where we just have nothing to do all day except for, just whatever we feel like doing. Most of us are living with, we have families and responsibilities and jobs and projects and hobbies, things that we want to do with our lives. And so the more automated something is, the more automatic it is, the less we have to focus on it, the less energy it takes, and the better you get at being able to be equipped. So basically, it's learning how to relate to time differently, and learning how to actually, especially with a mindfulness practice or a body mind practice, your world slows down. So you feel much more spacious and like you have more time to do what matters.
Yeah, you have more concentration, right? Do the things you're doing with more focus and actually doing them faster. At least that's what
Absolutely.
I find for me, Now, habits are really hard to change. And I understand you're a coach. You're also offering programs. Do you do like a group coaching program, or do you do one-on-one? Okay, so 2 questions here. I think a lot of women feel guilty about taking time for themselves, and then they might do even abusive behaviors, and maybe men too. So I don't want to just restrict it to women. Everybody, okay, can maybe even know that it would be better to do the healthy behavior, but something in themselves is keeping them away from it. How would you address that? And then how do you get a new habit established?
Those are really great questions. All habits are built on essentially a circuit of that every habit has a trigger or a cue. Then there's the habit itself, the behavior, and then there's the reward that you get from doing the behavior. That's why a habit sticks around, is that it's reinforced in our physiology with something positive. And so the key to changing a habit is to figure out what the reward is. So say you're in the habit of eating chocolate when you're stressed out, and that's a habit that you'd like to change, or just overeating in general when you're stressed out. That recognizing that, okay, what I'm needing here is not food. What I'm needing here is stress release. So what could I do instead that would give me the same results that I'm trying to get by eating this bag of potato chips or this chocolate bar? And so it's a very individual thing, but going into thinking about, like, what is the reward I'm trying to achieve, and meeting that in a different way, and also playing around with the cues. So like the 5 most common cues for a particular habit is going to be the time of day, the place, the person that you're with, the preceding action, or the emotional state. Those are the 5 things that are most common in terms of spurring a particular behavior on. And so, for example, if this person is mainly doing their stress eating at night, at the end of the day, they do great all day, but then after 7, they just graze the kitchen and can't be stopped. That if the need is for stress release, if the need is for comfort, really diving deep as to what that person is needing, and being able to substitute a behavior that will meet a similar need in a different way. So maybe I would suggest getting out of the kitchen at that time, maybe taking a walk instead, if that person, if movement helps to relieve stress. Or for other people, it's just about being in their bodies and wanting to feel good. And so maybe for that person, it's doing a self massage or taking an Epsom salt bath, or like it could, so that the solutions are not one size fits all, but generally speaking, the process is the same, where we look at what the reward is, we look at what the triggers are, and we play around with that until somebody is supported over a long enough period of time to have this new behavior stick. And usually what's required for that, like why we all have had that experience of having an intention or a New Year's resolution or a goal or something like that. And we're all fired up to make it happen. Or this is, in my case, people who leave my office intending to make whatever change that they're going to make. And they're really into it for a few days. But then, even though they are really well-intentioned, life happens, and so they end up not being able to follow through on their good intentions. And so I really wanted to create a group program where people could have that kind of support that they need every day from other like-minded people who are all working towards their next level of thriving, their next level of wellness. They can be coached and guided by somebody like me who's been walking the path for years and have some insights and strategies as to what might work, and being able to keep that going for long enough to make those few degrees worth of change in your compass orientation, such that after you've been traveling this new direction for a few months or a few years, you end up in a radically different place than you would have if you hadn't made those changes.
Great. So you're creating a support group. And the other thing I just heard you say is it's a few degrees of change. So yeah, would you elaborate?
Absolutely. So a lot of times there's different approaches, right, we can use in order to evolve our habits and our lives. So for example, you could quit sugar all at once. You could just decide from, henceforth, I am no longer someone who eats sugar of any kind. And you could just decide that that's your bright line that you're not going to cross. And and a lot of people do great with that sort of just being super clear on where the boundary is. Other people like to work incrementally. And so to be able to find like, okay, well, that feels like it's a bit much. So I'm going to just start with reading labels and not buying products that have any added sugar and not adding any refined sweeteners to my life. But I'm going to give myself the honey and the maple syrup that I like to put in my tea or in my coffee or something like that. And I'm going to let that be okay for a few weeks. So it's like there's a low hanging fruit that you can grab that feels easy, which is like, okay, I'm going to be the good label reader. And I'm just going to have this one thing that I really love. And then maybe a few weeks after that, the person might be ready to take the next step and build off of that. So that process, or the idea of the Kaizen approach of like a small change that feels doable, that you dial that in and then you take the next step when you feel ready. And so it's really like, and all of those, I just really believe in feeling good. And a lot of times feeling good means going with what your true desires are from a place of deep desire, not just like, ooh, I want that, I'm going to have it. But that idea of a deeper purpose and knowing, like being in alignment with the person that you want to be next year, the person that you want to be in 10 years, the goals that you want to achieve, the big stuff for yourself, and keeping yourself on track to really give birth to the next version of yourself. And that requires sort of a tension between who you are now and who you're becoming. And so it's like you definitely don't want to live for the future, but at the same time, you don't want to deny yourself the possibility of a bigger life than you could ever have imagined, if just by staying stuck and just feeling like, oh, it's just too hard. Because a lot of times the people I work with are the healthiest person they know. They're the ones who are at the cutting edge in their peer group. And so the idea of being able to connect with a like-minded group from people all over the world and all over different time zones coming together to do a similar thing. It's like we know that this model works from churches and spiritual groups and even Alcoholics Anonymous or like 12-step groups of all kinds. It's like when people come together to remind each other of what's important and why these values need to take root in their lives, it's the difference between success and failure for so many people. And so having somebody that can keep you accountable, to keep you supported, but also having peers who believe in this new version of yourself. Because a lot of times, like, people in your current life are like, they might be happy for you, but they also might secretly not want you to change. It's like, if they like the version of you that goes out drinking until 1 a.m, or if they like the fact that you do all the laundry for everybody in the house, and, or that they might not be excited about you deciding that you're going to live differently.
Yeah, thank you for addressing that. A lot of time, change is scary to people close to a person.
Yeah.
And there's often a lot of sabotage going on. I know for myself, sometimes say, okay, I want to do this. And then my husband comes home with chocolate.
Yes.
It's like, no, I just said we are up-leveling our green drinks again.
Yeah.
And I'm sure, so it's great to have such supports. And so this is basically peer support, where you're starting a group and people are supporting themselves. And then are you bringing the Chinese medicine into that group?
Yeah. So Level Up Your Life is self-care boot camp or self-care support, radical self-care community support. But it's all rooted that you learn 10 habits in 11 weeks. And those habits are rooted in the habits of the sages and yogis from the Ayurvedic and Chinese medicine traditions. That these things that about aligning with natural cycles, the idea of there being a time when you're naturally suited to, for example, go to sleep or digest your food. There's definitely things that people learn in the Level Up course that are going to expand your definition of what it means to take care of yourself and what it means to be in a human body. Really, it's really a lot of it is infused with the energetics and aligning with natural cycles from the wisdom traditions. I always bring into it the idea of your own individual constitution, that in Ayurveda, whether you're a Vata, Pitta, or Kapha type, and in Chinese medicine, whether you are the different strategies for wood, fire, earth, metal, and water. So if you're interested in Chinese medicine and this idea that what's out there in the natural world also exists in our bodies, and that our bodies are like this ecosystem, that's something that I teach in my Basics of Chinese Medicine course, which is subtitled Your Inner Ecosystem. There's so much wisdom that Chinese medicine has to offer about how our bodies work, then the holistic connections between our emotions, aspects of our minds, and our physiology, and that when we start to see ourselves in a new way, we can make different choices that are more balancing and that allow us to show up as the best versions of ourselves. And we definitely get into the issue of constitution and Level Up, but the focus is more on implementation, whereas in Basics of Chinese Medicine, that's really the deep dive. If people have been curious about the theory behind acupuncture, behind acupressure, behind Chinese herbology, and really understanding the philosophy at the level that you would get if you were a first-year acupuncture student, because nobody's teaching this stuff to lay people. It's basically like all in this like guarded ivory tower of Chinese medicine schools. I mean, you get a little bit if you take Qigong or Tai Chi, or if you're studying shiatsu therapy or things like that. But apart from these very specialized ways, like there's really very few places that you can learn this material. And so since it's changed my life in so many ways, understanding myself in a new way, that I wanted to offer that to people everywhere.
That's really interesting. I think a lot of people still think of Chinese medicine, weird tasting herbs and but Qigong and Tai Chi, so they're moving meditations which really put you in touch with your body. And I studied reflexology. I went to massage school at one point in my life too, and studied reflexology. And it's amazing how pain can be relieved. And my friend still blames me for her first daughter because she had infertility problems, and she came to visit me, and I did a bunch of foot reflexology on her. And she went home and got pregnant. So
yeah, essentially you're freeing up the flow of qi and blood to the reproductive system such that the body can make use of that energy differently. And so it's that is absolutely, reflexology is incorporated in Chinese medicine. We use the hands, the feet, the ear, the scalp. Really, any of these places have the entire body represented in them. And so being able to tap into, again, the microcosm and the macrocosm, addressing the part to address the whole.
Yeah, that's definitely the way to go. So you basically are teaching people then to do self-massage and figure out where the pressure points are as part of the course.
So Basics of Chinese Medicine has 8 modules, and it goes everything from the history of like the difference between the two models of Chinese medicine versus allopathic medicine, and the kind of how they're alike and how they're different. And then getting into each of the systems in the body. So in Chinese medicine, we, instead of thinking about like the endocrine system or the digestive system or the reproductive system, we think about the liver, the kidney, the heart, the lungs, the spleen. And we think about them involving capital letters. So not just the organs themselves that we know and love, but also an emotion and a dimension of our thoughts and perception and sort of like ways of relating to the world. We go into the 5-element theory where, so for example, the liver is connected with the emotion of anger and also with creativity and movement of upward and outward. That's what anger has in common with creativity, right? Moves us upward and outward, or it's this expansive sort of energy. And so we might learn, or we would learn, a handful of acupoints to regulate the liver that have everything to do with from digesting our food to regulating things like anger and creativity, and what essential oils we could use on that, why it's related to the season of the spring, why, what foods are going to be good to help the liver, what tastes does it resonate with, it's like looking at light through a prism, where it all looks like it's all energy. It's all just kind of this clear light on one side of the prism, but then we can refract it into the 5 different elements. And so we spend a week focused on each of the elements, so wood, fire, earth, metal, and water, and learning it. So each of those elements has an organ system that goes with it. And so we learn a little bit about each of those systems and how to support it and how to balance it in our bodies, as well as kind of like where most of our energy goes. So if everybody's got a different concentration of energy that goes towards one of these 5 elements or 2 of these 5 elements, like we tend to not be evenly balanced. And so understanding how energy tends to flow in our own bodies can help us with some of the chronic problems that we tend to experience.
Interesting. Now, are you bringing the Ayurveda in with that too? I mean, it's 2 ancient systems, really.
Yeah, they're really different. Ayurveda makes its way more into level up. But Basics of Chinese Medicine, I try to not confuse people by blending an entire other system into an 8-week course.
Yeah, that might be a bit much.
Yeah, it is. But when we talk about things like aligning your sleep with natural cycles, like one thing to think about from the Ayurvedic perspective, as well as the Chinese medicine perspective, is that every system of the body has its time when it kicks into gear. And so if we're trying to rest during a time when there's a lot of activity and focus, for example, into the liver gallbladder system, which starts at around 11 p.m., it's going to give us a second wind, which is really not going to be there if we go to bed at 10. So like just being able to rectify our timing such that it makes more sense. In the Ayurvedic system, you want to go to sleep during kapha time, when the energy is much more about stillness and rest and yin, and you want to be asleep before this sort of like upward outward energy kicks in the middle of the night. Now it's kicking in the middle of the night so that we can detoxify, so we can digest and purify the blood. It's important to be asleep during that time. Chinese medicine is going to totally agree with that. And so both Ayurveda and Chinese medicine are going to talk about making sure that you don't eat within 3 hours of sleeping, and that you get to bed, before 10, so that by 11, when the liver kicks in, it can be cleaning your blood and helping you wake up the next morning feeling refreshed and not toxic. Things like that. There are definitely overlaps in the 2 systems where most people don't really care which tradition it comes from, but the fact that you've got these 2 3,000 to 5,000 year old systems saying the same thing, I think lends a lot of credence to the advice that I'm giving in the course.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you were just saying that, it made me think of something else, but it sounds like you need to be asleep during the time when the liver kicks in for the benefit to come in. Because what I was thinking of said, I read sleep studies before where they were saying that people used to go to bed, obviously when the sun goes down, and then a lot of time would get up in the middle of the night and then go to bed again and sleep again. Yes. So when you first said the liver kicks in, I'm like, oh, maybe that's why people used to wake up at that time.
now when people are waking up at 2 a.m, for example, that a lot of times it's because they're metabolizing sugar or alcohol. And so that's going to be a tip off that the liver is involved. And as opposed to getting up at 4 a.m, for example, which would have less to do with the liver. Being able to see patterns where like Western medicine might not necessarily look that deeply, might just prescribe a sleeping pill as opposed to looking at why someone is getting up at one time versus another and what might be done about it from a lifestyle perspective.
Yeah, so interesting. I studied homeopathy a little bit, so that's, it's different, but it's the same idea is that you need to look at the whole body.
Exactly.
And again, bringing it into with what we are talking about a lot in the podcast, it's everything we do kind of affects everything in our life. We touched a little bit on plastic. Maybe we can talk a little bit about how even just having plastic in your life can affect your health.
Absolutely. Well, plastics are not good for us because they are a source of xenoestrogens, right? Fake estrogens that trick the body and that sort of match our own estrogen receptors and are confusing. They disrupt our endocrine system. And so taking plastic out is going to leave much more energy for creativity, for detoxification, in a way where like it's just one more thing that's adding stress to an already overloaded liver. Actually, I have a resource that I could make available. I did a blog post a while ago on 22 ways to love your liver. I did it for a spring launch at some point, but so for listeners in the Southern Hemisphere that are going into spring right now, that could be useful, but otherwise people can bookmark it. But that the idea that there is, when you have that kind of unnatural substance that the body is harboring, and continuing to, like, we store these in our fat cells, it takes a lot of energy to keep poisons sequestered in our bodies. And so that may be actually a hidden reason why people can't lose weight, is that their bodies, the fat cells, are harboring toxic chemicals that are fat soluble. And so among them being things from plastics, it's not in the body's best interest to liberate that fat, because then the prisoners get out of jail and they're overrunning the system. And so it's sort of, it's a case for making sure that you do periodic cleanses and detoxes so that so you can fully get those out of the body. But also it's a case for becoming a really good fat burner, because whether or not you need to lose weight is irrelevant. We all need to be really good at burning our fat so that we can be on a regular basis emptying the trash from fat soluble toxins from the environment that we are hanging on to.
Wow. So how do you become a good fat burner?
That's a great question. One thing is we need to stop eating every few hours, right? The idea of meal spacing versus meal stacking is critical. And Chinese medicine and Ayurveda would both point to this, that essentially if you're eating every couple of hours, like anytime you might think that you're hungry, having a little snack or a little something, your body's always just burning off what it just ate. And it's never really having to burn fat as fuel. Whereas if you make sure that you are eating only 3 times a day at the most, and eating dinner early enough to enable a 13-hour fast at night, and where you break the fast with breakfast, right? That word literally means to break the fast. Then you've been able to go into a stage where the liver gallbladder can detoxify the blood, and where you can be burning your fat instead of burning off what you just ate in the form of sugar. And it's a much more stable and even keel form of fuel than sugar. So there's a lot less highs and lows of energy and a lot more stability, a lot more clarity of thinking, in addition to the benefits of detoxing the body from toxic chemicals, which if we don't detoxify from, are creating kind of this burden that's dragging us down, and that can of course turn nasty on us and lead to things like cancers and autoimmune disease. So it's so we all need that, which means we need not only like meal spacing and meal stacking, we also need to be really good at digesting. And so in Chinese medicine, we think about not only the protein, fat, carb, vitamins and minerals that are in food, but also the nature and energetics of food. So its temperature and its tastes, and whether or not we can digest it determine whether or not it's good for us, as well as the season of the year that we're eating it and the timing, again, of when we're eating it. So we're mammals and we're evolved to be able to look at our food. And so we should really only be eating during daylight hours, for example. So there's all sorts of little tips that the wisdom traditions have for us for the struggles that we face in modern life. That are, it's maybe even more important now that we do live in such a toxic world where there's plastics assaulting us all the time, than our ancestors did, and when calories were scarce and when we did not have all these artificial chemicals.
That's interesting, to only eat when it's light. I mean, there are areas in the world where in winter there's not a lot of light at all. Yeah.
Really true. True. And so we actually have to, where that's not possible, it becomes more important to eat seasonally and to make sure that in the winter that we're making it as easy as possible to digest. And so that's going to mean cooking lots of soups and stews and one-pot meals that are spiced with things that enhance digestion, and where the food has been, for example, in a crock pot or a stew that's been cooking for a long period of time, so that if you're having like animal protein, for example, that can be very hard to digest, but in a soup or a stew, it's been broken down, so it's much more easily assimilated, and therefore it's going to burn much more cleanly by the person eating it.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. When I go to Germany in the winter, I want to eat completely different from being in San Diego in the summertime.
Yeah, exactly. It's intuitive that you don't necessarily want an iceberg lettuce salad in the middle of winter in Germany.
I don't ever want an iceberg lettuce.
Yeah.
But that's besides the point. So when you do the fast, like let's say it's 13 hours, is it no drink and food, or can you have water?
Water's fine and herbal teas are fine, but just anything that the body has to actually engage in breaking down and digesting is going to undermine the fast.
So it's the idea, I mean, I don't drink milk, but there is a thing, have some warm milk before you go to bed. That's not a good idea, then.
Well, again, it's like that looking at costs and benefits for every person. And so clearly sleep is something that we all need in order to function well. There's that, warm milk before bed is often, like, the reason given is often that it helps with sleep. Research that I know of would contradict that, but there's plenty of ways of soothing the body and enticing it towards sleep in ways that don't involve kicking on a dynamic metabolic process, which digestion is.
That makes sense. Can I ask you a really random question?
Go for it.
So I had a friend. Do you know what Bermuda grass is?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So he was telling me that he used to dig up the roots and sold it as Chinese medicine. Is that true? I mean, is it actually a Chinese medicine, or was he just making fun of people?
I don't know.
Okay.
I mean, there's hundreds of herbs in the Chinese pharmacopoeia,
Right.
and honestly, I learned them all by their Chinese name first, before their common name. So I'd have to look that up, but off the top of my head, it doesn't sound familiar.
Okay. Because, we are battling Bermuda grass all the time, and I'm like, okay, I want to find some good about you.
Yeah, sure.
And if it is, and I'm making tea for myself, and I want to know what I'm doing to my body drinking it, is it a positive or a negative? So, yeah. So that just kind of popped in my head right now. Random. Sorry.
Oh, hang on a second. So as I'm Googling this, somebody is saying, okay, Bermuda grass. Apparently it's an Ayurvedic herb, not one that I use, but in any case, yes, Durva, I suppose, is its Ayurvedic name. Yeah, like in general, like invasive weeds are often really nutritious because they are the ones that are able to dig deep and get the nutrients that more tame domestic plants of the ecosystem can't. And so a lot of times, like, I definitely encourage people to get to know the invasive weeds that are around them, because a lot of times they will have incredible high nutrient density, like dandelions, for example. They're everywhere, and any leafy green is going to tend to be very mineral rich and have a lot going for it. So really, dandelions are super healthy. Yeah, like where I live in the Pacific Northwest, we've got Himalayan blackberries growing everywhere, and looking deeper at why is this showing up in this ecosystem. And certainly blackberries are going to be good for cleaning the blood. They're definitely things that we should be eating when they're in season. So I think you're definitely onto something of wanting to figure out the properties of the invasives near you. So, and in general, like the green stuff is often going to be very cooling and detoxifying, is sort of the nature of grasses in general from a Chinese medicine perspective. I would imagine that, not having studied this, that Bermuda grass could be similar.
Yeah, most greens have great benefits to you,
Yes.
which makes me think of so many people do green smoothies. Is it some you advocate for?
I think, like everything in Chinese medicine and in Ayurveda, we never think about, is this good or bad? We think about, is this good or bad for this particular human being at this particular time and place? So again, in rainy Germany in December, should you be having a green smoothie for breakfast when your digestive fire is like weak because it's been dormant all night? Like, probably not, unless you're also, like having a green soup for breakfast might be much more balancing in that case. Or if you are going to have a green smoothie in the winter in a cold and damp climate, making sure that there's enough warming digestive spices so that it's not going to just be like a pile of wet leaves smothering your little digestive fire. So literally, like, if you imagine your stomach as like a campfire, that it has to be engaged in this dynamic process of breaking down the food and assimilating it so that your body can use it. And so if you're dumping cold water, and green smoothies being energetically cold and serving it cold, and especially if you're combining it with complicated things like protein powders or like yogurt, things like that, it can be very difficult for the body to sort out what that is and to be able to make use of it. So ways to make green smoothies more medicinal would be to have them when it's hot, to have them with warming spices. Like, I put a lot of fresh ginger in my green smoothies, by making sure that it's only combining, like, you only combine your greens with seasonal fruit and water without a whole lot of other stuff, like, so no complicated protein powders, no dairy products. That's keeping it simple for the digestive system to sort out. And if you're someone who's always cold, it's probably not a great idea. Like, you'd probably do much better with having some cooked greens and some sort of protein source, or having some oatmeal with some seeds and nuts in it or something like that would be a better breakfast for a person who's constantly dealing with feeling cold or feeling like their body's having trouble with water metabolism. So like maybe they're puffy, or they have swellings, or they constantly have a runny nose, or things like that.
Yeah, that makes sense. It seems to me a lot of women have low thyroid function and are cold because of that. I heard somewhere said don't use cabbage plants in your green smoothie for women because of the effect on thyroid. Is it just old wives' tales?
I'm familiar with what you're referencing as far as thyroid health. From what I understand, like, there is debate about that, so I'm not going to weigh in on like an absolute yes or an absolute no. But generally speaking, I also encourage people to not think about the thyroid in isolation. That really, when we think about any aspect of the endocrine system, we have to consider it that all the hormones work together. And so very rarely do you find that someone has thyroid issues if they're not already having issues with their adrenals, for example, or if there's not already a blood sugar issue taking place, or just that it's oftentimes it's a time to get curious and to look deeper as to kind of what else is going on in the system. And so again, I wouldn't say, like, as a general rule, like for people with thyroid issues, green smoothies are good or bad, but in general, across the board, most people would do better cooking their greens than eating them raw.
Interesting, because that's so different from what the raw foodists are saying.
Yep, it is. It is. And if we look at that, like, sort of how I would counter that is that if you're someone who's constantly overheating, and you're someone who's been eating a standard American diet or a standard Western diet with a lot of meat and a lot of processed food and sugar and things like alcohol and all that, you're going to feel great on a raw food diet. If your digestive system is strong enough to break down plant cellulose, then that could be an awesome medicine for a lot of people. If your digestion is weaker, raw food is going to present a challenge. So even though if there's, let's say, 10 ergs of goodness in a raw carrot and only 7 in a cooked carrot, but your ability to extract that nutrition, because you're not what you eat, you're what you can digest. And so if your digestive system is rock solid and strong and you can get 10 out of 10, then great. But most people can't. Most people don't even know what good digestion is. I'll ask, how's your digestion? And they'll say, fine. And then I'll ask things like, well, do you have an appetite? Well, not really. I could sort of eat maybe whenever. Or like I have a lot of gas and bloating, and a few times a week I take Tums because, heartburn, and that's just normal. And or maybe they're only pooping 3 times a week, or just things that people really have grown accustomed to that they have no idea shouldn't be happening. It's like our digestive system should be operating in the background and we shouldn't notice them. And we should all be eliminating easily every day and completely. And we should feel a pulsation between hunger and fullness. Basically, have dialogue with our bodies. Yeah, in my experience clinically, getting people to tune into their bodies and understand what's going on digestively for them, there's never really a one size fits all solution. And most people actually need to strengthen their digestive systems much more. A really important first step that people might overlook in an attempt to cleanse or to lose weight, they actually might be getting in their own way.
By now, I was very interested in Brodie's courses, and I asked her to explain more.
So in Level Up, 3 of the 11 modules, or 3 of the 10 habits that we focus on, are about healthier eating guidelines. And that's going to be from a Chinese medicine and Ayurvedic, and also just living in the world perspective of like kind of what does that mean. So it's a way that people can learn a lot about what good digestion is and isn't, as well as figure out kind of like where you are on a continuum and be able to kind of move in the right direction. Basics of Chinese medicine breaks down food in a much more specific way in terms of giving you an overview from the Chinese medicine perspective of which foods are going to be heating, which foods are going to be cooling, which foods are going to target specifically the liver, the kidneys, the lungs, etc. Generally, if you've got a complicated medical history, there's going to be many organs involved. And so it can be useful to have a guide to walk you through kind of like what you should be doing. But really, I encourage people to not lose the forest for the trees. Like if you can understand food as medicine from an energetic perspective and understand what the 5 tastes do in your body, you can get that from either course. And so it's just really a question of whether you would want to be focused on implementing a new way of eating or simply exposing yourself to these concepts, because evolving eating habits could be a lifelong process.
Learning about health is too.
Sure.
We have so much literature now, and some of it completely is opposite from each other. So you read it, and then you're like, ugh, what now? Coffee is good, coffee is bad. No, it's good. No, it's bad. You know what I mean?
I do. Like what you're talking about is exactly, there's so much noise and confusion about what's quote unquote good for you. And that's really where I feel like Ayurveda and Chinese medicine have the answer, because it's not about coffee good or bad. It's about, let's look at the nature of coffee. Right? Like the nature of coffee. It's heating, it's oily, it moves radically in a both upward and downward direction. Like we could analyze any food as an herb really deeply. We could go into this, but then figuring out like, okay, does your nervous system need to be revved up? Like, maybe like I personally think that if you've got a sluggish liver, a little coffee might be good for you, but not if you're the kind of person whose life is already full of speed and too much movement. And if you're already dealing with too much heat, that something that's more heating and more stimulating is not going to be medicine. Whereas someone who's much more sedentary, it's like that, like a little coffee for that person is certainly could be medicine. So it's really not about the oversimplification of eggs, good, bad, latest research, this says this says this, as opposed to the idea that everybody's got an individual constitution, and understanding yourself is going to give you the tools to take care of yourself forever.
Yeah, I totally love that. You know what? We have talked for an hour already, and
we have, yes.
And I would love to continue, but at the same time, I want to honor your time. Would you tell our listeners how to reach you?
Absolutely. Yeah. So if people want to stay connected with me, they can visit my website, which is brodiewelch.com. That's Brodie with an IE and Welch with a CH. And you can check out Level Up, which is the coaching program. You can also check out Basics of Chinese Medicine under the Learn from Home tab. And really, if Level Up is something that you're interested in, I am happy to hop on the phone with you and just figure out if it's a right fit. And you can schedule that directly from the website. And if you just want to get to know me better, you can listen to my podcast, which is A Healthy Curiosity, available wherever you get your podcasts. And I also, on my website, I have a lot of different resources, and I've been blogging and writing about Chinese medicine for a while, as well as habit evolution. So people can certainly find their way to the free breathing break, to some simple Qigong. I have an at-home Qigong class if people are interested in dialing in a body mind practice that's quick and easy. I have meditations on the different organ systems and on healthier eating. And so, yeah, I'd encourage people to go there. I would love to stay in touch with you if this is resonating with you out there.
Wonderful. It's resonating with me.
Excellent.
And I have listened to your podcast and I absolutely love it. Also, you mentioned the resource, and we do have quite a few people in Australia. So that would be good for them. If you want to send me a link, then I definitely will include it in the show notes.
No problem.
Now, I didn't want to just cut you off. Is there anything else you would like to share before we say goodbye?
What I hope people take away from this conversation is just that in navigating the world of health and figuring out what the right things are to do, that really you are your own best guide and teacher, and that taking the time that you need for yourself, taking time to think about who do you want to become next, how do you want to feel, and what are the habits that are going to take you there, and making sure that those are the things that get prioritized. If working either with group support or with a guide is useful, then yeah, please reach out.
Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks, Marianne.
As I said in the beginning, Brodie offered us a really, really great discount. So she's offering 15% off of 2 of her courses. You use the coupon code SUSTAIN. So that's S as in Sam, U, S as in Sam, T as in Tom, A as in Apple, I as in Igloo, and N as in Nancy. The courses you get at 15% off is 12 Treasures Qigong, and the other one is Basics of Chinese Medicine. I suggest you check her out. If you come to our website, sustainablelivingpodcast.com, I'm going to have a blog post with all the links to find all the great offerings Brodie has. As I said, I did the free breath meditation. You know, sometimes it's just taking a minute or 2 or 3 away from your day, and centering makes all the difference. So take advantage of it. You guys, thank you so much for listening. And if you were following us on social media at all, you know that this particular episode I had edited and then lost the edit. So you might have seen some pictures of me pulling my hair out. So all good which ends good, right? Thank you so much for listening, for being part of the tribe. And hey, we do have an email list. You can, when you go over to the website, there is a pop-up popping up, and you can put in your name and email. Every maybe 2, 3 to 4 weeks, you get an email from us. We are not sending huge amounts of email out, but we love to have you. Bye for now.